Welcome to this conference about tips to deal with and not to get scared by the risk in projects. My name is Dr. Carlos Colón Riollano, and I'll be your instructor and host in this presentation. Are you ready? Good. In this slide, we have the presentation outline or agenda we're planning to cover in this conference. We will start by defining what a risk is and what is not. Next, we will explain in more details the risk management process end-to-end, from risk identification to risk closing. Then, we will talk about risk analysis, risk response planning, and next, a very underestimated task, which is risk communication, which is not just important for risk management, but through the whole project life cycle. Finally, we will discuss the risk governance, what is this all about, how it's implemented, and some tips and best practices about risk governance. Now let's take a minute and think about our last project and ask ourselves the following questions. How do you rate yourself managing risk? Do you see yourself as a risk-seeking person? Maybe risk-averse, or maybe risk-neutral? Can you name a few examples where you see yourself taking risk? Maybe you do like string sports, like I do, sport that comes along with some risk. Maybe rock climbing, parachuting, just to name a few. On the other hand, maybe you're risk adverse, so you don't like to take risks. Or maybe you do, but calculated risk. How about your eating habits? Maybe they're not that healthy, so that could trigger some health problems. Now, how about your organizational culture? How do your organizational culture handle risks when it comes to projects? Is your organizational culture risk neutral, maybe risk seeking or risk adverse? Trust me, this is a very important element that you need to take into consideration when you're managing your projects. How about your project manager colleagues, your key project stakeholders? How do they manage risk? Does your organization have risk managers? If so, what are their specific roles and functions? Finally, how often do you really develop a risk management plan? And if you do, how often you use it? So let's define what a risk is. We have here several risk definitions. The first one comes from PMI, or the Project Management Institute. And they define a risk as an uncertain event or condition that, if occurs, have an effect on at least one project objective. Another definition comes from the Department of Defense, and they define a risk as a measure of future uncertainties in achieving program, performance goals, and objectives within defined cost, schedule, and performance constraint. Another very sweet, short, and easy definition of a risk comes from Cooper. Cooper says that a risk is an exposure to the consequences of uncertainty. Finally, I'm in the process of publishing a book about project management. And in my book, I'm also defining a risk. And I'm saying that a risk is an identified, that is very important, it's an identified potential, position, situation, condition, scenario, or circumstances where the occurrence is uncertain. So what are the typical risk components? First of all, as I mentioned before, a risk needs to be identified, needs to be labeled, needs to be numbered, so we can later on refer to it, to that risk event, to that risk scenario, to that risk activity, for analysis, for tracking, for oversight, for closing. Secondly is the likelihood or possibility of this event to occur. Now, once again, I have to insist that if we know for sure 100% that this event is going to happen or is currently happening, then probably it's not a risk. Maybe it's a problem or an issue or a constraint, but it's not a risk. There's no uncertainty in something that is happening right now. The last component is the consequence or effect if that potential event occurred. And please remember that a risk, perhaps, what is the main purpose of risk management but to anticipate potential problems, potential situations, potential issues, and even potential opportunities, with the main intention of improving the project success results, the project outcomes, the project deliverables. It is very proactive to try and anticipate these unforeseen situations that might affect our project deliverables. If a potential problem situation might happen to your project, you should be prepared to deal with these undesired project outcomes, so you can either mitigate, transfer, avoid, or perhaps accept this risk. Now, managing risk needs to also have discipline to tackle these situations proactively. That means that requires some planning, discipline, a very, very effective communication at all levels, upper levels, middle levels, and lower levels. There are certain situations in our project that if they occurred, it can definitely adversely delay our project deliverables, add a lot of unplanned cost, maybe additional resources, and even unsatisfy stakeholders, or even worse, even get our project canceled. Now, in order to manage this risk, a seasoned project manager need to provide sound risk information, need to have a timely, candid, open communication with the project team, with the key stakeholders, external and internal, and so all resources are aware of these potential situations and their consequences. The organizational culture play a very important role here, and a seasoned project manager leverage the risk management best practices in order to train and educate their resources, their colleagues, project managers, their peers, their project team members, so they can proactively contribute to this risk management process. Now, the risk management discipline allow not just a project manager but the project team to contribute and proactively identify and manage, understand potential problems and opportunities in the project. Once we identify the potential risks, then we move on to analyze them. So we have the chance to prioritize and tackle the harder risk. That means the risks that have the highest exposure or better chances to occur. Once we have this risk properly identified, we can also assign our best resources to deal with them estimate a potential cost related to each risk, or the cost to mitigate these identified threats. Here we have an holistic view of the risk management process. You will notice that communicating and consulting, as well as tracking and oversight of monitoring review, are cornerstones of this risk management process. It's important to realize that this is not something that happens once at the beginning of the project. We don't identify risk just at the beginning of the project. This is something that it should be performed on a very regular basis. And the team needs to be very involved with these risk management process. So probably this risk identification, for example, it's something that should be part of our risk review meetings or the every status meeting in our project. Here we have another view of our core processes for risk management end to end. And the first step is to create a risk management plan. And this document could be a very straightforward and simple one, or a very complex, a very elaborated. It will depend probably on the project size, project complexity, project duration, project cost, just to name a few. Nevertheless, this document should hold the methodology, the process, the techniques, the tools, the strategies to identify, analyze, monitor, and respond to a risk. But allow me to clarify something. I just want to be clear on this. The risk management plan is not the actual document where you identify, analyze, and respond to risk. Most probably is the risk register or the risk log. And how to use the risk log, or risk register, where it's located, that information should be inside the risk management plan. Okay? Now the second step is to identify risk. Okay? Identify this event, these scenarios that if it happens, it might affect your project, either positive or negative. Now let's think for a minute. Let's imagine that you receive an email today saying that required deliverable will not be delivered on time because XYZ. Well, this situation is definitely not a risk. It's a problem. There's no uncertainty in that email. The email is saying loud and clear that this deliverable will not be delivered on time. Now, this situation might trigger some risk, but that information is definitely not a risk. Once again, there's no uncertainty in this situation. Okay. Now, the third step is to perform an analysis, and PMI recommends two analyses: quantitative and qualitative analysis. Now, the main purpose of these analyses is to understand the size, the magnitude, the triggers, how big, how much damage or benefits this potential scenarios are all about. In order to, and that's, if you understand these, then you can provide an adequate response, an adequate treatment for that situation. Now, the next step is to provide that response. Now, a lot of people confuse the risk response with mitigation, but mitigation is just one of the several responses to a risk. We will explain that later on. The final step is to monitor and control, and that is something that will be performed over and over and over continuously until the end of the project. It is crucial to understand the risk attitude and tolerances of your project team, of your key stakeholders, and definitely of your organizational culture. Trust me, if your project sponsor or key project stakeholders are either risk adverse or risk takers, that will indeed have some impact on how you're going to manage your risk, how you're going to respond to a risk. You should find more information about stakeholders' attitude, tolerances, expectation, needs under the stakeholder register, which is a similar document to the risk register, but this one holds specific information about attitude, tolerances, information, even sensitive information about stakeholders. Now, going back to the risk management plan, we need to emphasize that this is the place that holds the methodology that we will use to manage risk through the project entire cycle, the project life cycle. It also holds the predefined actions that the project team will take if an identified event occurs. In fact, it happens to me before. If an organization doesn't recognize, there's at least 7 typical responses to a risk, but maybe this organization they're risk adverse. So because of that, they just recognize just 3 of them, 3 typical responses, or 4 or 5. It depends on their tolerances. It also used to authenticate all contingency reserves. There are typically 2 types of reserve: the project management reserve and the management reserve. This reserve provides the project manager as well as the whole project some additional resources to mitigate in terms of cost or schedule these unexpected events. Now, this plan is usually required for all major and risky projects. Probably a more elaborated than a one-pager, as I mentioned before. Let's do another quick checkpoint. Let's take a minute to ask to ourselves, how do I identify the risk in my projects? Do I have a process, maybe a guidelines, maybe a checklist, or instruction to do this? Do I have weekly meetings where we as a team discuss this potential risk in my project? Why is it important to take or not to take this particular risk? And how is it related to my project objectives? Who are the individuals responsible for implementing the risk management plan? Do we have a PMO? Is it the project manager? Is it the project team? How much is required in terms of resources to mitigate the risk? Here's an example of a typical risk management plan that comes from the CDC, or the U.S. Center for Disease Control. This is just a table of contents, but if you look closely, you will notice that it holds the process, the risk identification, how they're going to perform the risk analysis. And we have here the 2 flavors, how we're going to perform the qualitative risk analysis as well as the quantitative risk analysis. What are the responses or typical responses? How we're going to monitor, control, and report. Additionally, it also presents to the reader the tools and best practices for the CDC. If you notice on page 3, it needs to be approved, probably by management, probably by the project manager as well. Now let's take a minute to think about it. Anything missing from that plan? Can you improve this risk management plan? How this plan fit my organization? Do you think it would work? Does that fit my current project? Is it too complicated? Is it too elaborated? How your risk, specifically your risk management plan looks like? Let me see if we're getting all these concepts. Okay, in this scenario, Manuel is the project manager who works for Riollano and Associates Inc. and he's in charge of this specific project. He is working with the project team to create, apply, and document the procedures to manage every risk through the projects. This document will define how risk will be identified, quantified, managed, tracked, oversight. It will also define how contingency plans will be implemented by the project team. What document Manuel and his project team are creating or working on? Can you guess? Is it the resource management plan? Is it the project management plan? Is it just the project plan? Is it the risk management plan? Yes, that is right. It's the risk management plan. It's the document that holds the procedures to manage risk through the project life cycle and explain and defines how risk will be identified and quantified. Good job. Now the next step is risk identification. And this is the activity that explores, discriminate, names, numbered the risky elements of my project to begin the documentation and set the stage for the successful management. What are the typical inputs to identify risk? Well, there could be several sources. Performance measurements, reports that talk about performance. Schedule, oh definitely, the schedule is a typical source to identify risk. Maybe some resource data, some earned value management data, some differences between the baseline and the actual, maybe the critical path, maybe some safety issues or problems that could trigger some risk, operational readiness, as well as other information available to project stakeholders. Interviewing is a very easy way to get information from people, their experiences, their needs, their assumptions, their intentions, even their commitment. The strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, or the SWOT analysis, examine the project from these four perspectives in order to identify risk. This is a very good exercise that is fast, focused, agile, and sometimes can be performed on a regular basis by the project teams to update these four areas. The risk register. I would say that this is one of the most important tools in the risk management process. This is the work product where you can assess, list, identify, track, and overall manage the project risk. It should include information such as risk probability, impact, countermeasures, who's going to be the risk owner, is there a fallback plan, should be here as well, or a plan B should be here as well, the risk triggers, risk responses, and even lessons learned. Sometimes this document can also be referred as risk log. While we're doing the risk analysis, there's a good opportunity to prioritize, to sort, to order this potential risk events in terms of impact, occurrence, and cost. There's definitely the project manager as well as the project team does not have all the time in the world just to focus on risk. So prioritizing, sorting, ordering this risk makes a lot of sense, and it will definitely allow better decision making to this risk that have the higher priority in terms of exposure and impact. Risk can be either positive or negative, and a pure negative event, it's usually called pure risk. And a pure risk, it's this identified potential situation or condition that has no positive result. It's just loss, it's just a threat, so no beneficial results can be identified or can be associated with this potential event. The typical response to this pure risk can be either to avoid, to transfer, to mitigate, or accept it. Now, to avoid a pure risk is to eliminate this threat or the source of this threat. To transfer involves moving or shifting the result or effect of this risk to another party. To mitigate is to try to reduce the probability and impact of this event. And to accept it, you can either accept it in a passive or active manner. That will depend on the organizational culture or probably the risk tolerances. Now, to avoid is to eliminate the risk caused, either to remove some specific activities or resources. Let's say that you want to avoid the risk of having lung cancer, but you're smoking. So if you want to mitigate, well, not mitigate, to probably if you want to eliminate this potential problem, it's definitely a good choice to eliminate the cigar or quit smoking. Another example, let's say that you have this resource in the project, and this is a well-known resource, that it's popular for his bad temper and poor performance, but he or she is the only SME in that particular area. So, and that resource was assigned to your project. Well, that's definitely a problem as well as a potential risk. That's definitely could trigger potential problem and risk as well. So one way to eliminate this potential risk is to try to get another resource, to get a replacement, perhaps an outside resource. Now to transfer is to pass it, this negative situation to another party. Okay, a typical example. Let's say that you're in this construction project, and you're doing this construction project during the hurricane season. Well, there's chances that a hurricane hit the town that you're working on right now. So a good option could be to get an insurance that is willing to reimburse for the days that you're not working because of the hurricane. Now, to mitigate, that is, I would say that the most popular risk response it's a systematic reduction of this the exposure of the risk. Now, for example, to train your resources might reduce the lack of experience or exposure to rework in project associated with this specific deliverables, because this lack of knowledge. We need to clarify that mitigation might not eliminate totally the detrimental result of a risky event. Perhaps the intention is to continue the project with the least adverse side effects on that particular risk exposure. Now, the other side of the coin is the opportunities or positive risk. And this category includes exploit, share, enhance, and also, yes, accept. Accept is common in either a positive or a negative risk. Sorry, and to exploit is to maximize, and I will, once again, I will elaborate this a little bit more later on. And to exploit is to maximize the increase of opportunities to realize this opportunity. To share, it's something similar to like transfer in the pure risk. Okay. To enhance is to raise the probability to this type of risk. Okay, and optimizing the chances to occur. And to accept it is to, well, this is definitely a good risk, a good opportunity. Let's take advantage of this situation and let's accept it. Now, to exploit means to maximize the chances to make the most of this potential positive risk. For example, for the last couple of years, this community college is experiencing an increase in their student enrollment. So management initiate a project to build additional classroom to attend this opportunity. In this situation, the expectation, the bet, the opportunity is that more students will enroll in this particular community college. So we need definitely to have the resources in this situation, the facility, the classroom to accommodate this potential new students. Now, to share an opportunity is to allocate some ownership to a third party who have some interest, some expertise, or expressively share with you the intention to enter into a partnership. Let's go back to the previous example of the community college. The opportunity is to attend this to attend this additional or potential additional new student. But let's say that we don't have the capital to build these additional classrooms. So we share this opportunity with this other company who happens to have some empty facilities that can easily turn into classrooms. And they accept our proposal and lending these facilities for these purposes at a very low rate, since they also see an opportunity and the possibility of a mutual beneficial long-term contract. Now, enhance, it's an opportunity to increase the probability of this positive risk to occur. For example, probably everyone's in here known Mr. Usain Bolt. Now, he is considered to be the fastest man alive. Perhaps he did not earn that title by accident. It was a result of hard work, discipline, and a lot of training. So these conditions enhances Mr. Bolt probabilities to win his races. Another checkpoint. This is probably similar to one that we already discussed previously. Now, you're managing a construction project in the Caribbean region during the hurricane season. So there are chances, a risk, that your construction project will be affected by one of these weather problems. Now, what could be a response to this type of risk? Is it avoid, maybe transfer, or mitigate, accept, exploit, shared, or maybe enhance? Okay, another checkpoint. There are several potential answers to the previous question. You can either accept this risk and use your company emergency plan, if you have one, to manage the consequences of this event in your project. Then later on, assess the result and damages for further action. Another option is to transfer the potential losses to other party, and this could be viable if you get an insurance to cover any potential losses as a consequence of the hurricane. Finally, you can also mitigate. This is another potential response to this risk, since you can prepare your team, secure your equipment and material to reduce the consequences in the project. You can even combine these responses. That means to transfer and mitigate. For example, to monitor and control imply that these risk situations might change. Project will have to face new risk. Risk that occurs could trigger additional risk and opportunities. And the vehicle to update, analyze, and respond to this risk is, guess what? Yes, the risk register. So as you notice, risk management is a very lively activity. The top 10 or top 20 risk item tracking list, it's a tool and strategy that I use a lot in my projects. It helps the project manager to focus on this particular risk that present the most benefits, the most threat, the most damage, or the most costly situation. It becomes pretty handy when you incorporate this risk top 10 or top 20 risk item list as part of your periodic review meetings, status meetings, project team meetings. Risk timely communication with your sponsor, your project team, to your contractor definitely pay back. Poor risk communication could be very costly to the project. So in order to effectively communicate, you have to plan this communication. That sounds like the project communication plan. And this document holds the process, the procedures, the templates, the policies for an effective and timely communication. It holds when all this risk meeting is going to happen, who's going to participate, this risk plan, the risk register, when it's going to be updated, where it's located. Okay, uh, the stakeholder management plan is another document that also includes the needs in an expectation of the stakeholder, so that it's definitely an important information that you have to take into consideration for an effective risk communication. There are several ways and several methods for communication. Uh, an interactive form, it's when we have this communication between two or more parties performing a multi-directional exchange of information. Example, conversations, meetings, phone calls, video conference call. One person provides information, the other received it, and then respond to that information. We also have the push communication, when we send to a specific recipient who need to know that information. The sender provides the information to the people who need but it who need it, but does not expect feedback on the communication. Examples: letters, memos, reports, email, faxes, voice, emails, status reports, press releases. Now the pool is used to distribute large document or to send information to many people or for a very large audience. Example, intranet, e-learning, and knowledge repositories. This communication methods, it's definitely depends on how, once again, on the organizational culture and the preferences of your audience. It's important to recognize as well that more than 90% of the project manager time, it's spent uh, communicating. Risk governance. Now, risk governance is concerned with the translation of matter and foundation principles of governance to the perspective of risk and risk-related decision making. Now, risk governance confirms the framework, the structure, the base, the policy, the standards to make project risk management sustain during the whole project life cycle. It's a very important area to, once again, to sustain and keep these risk management alive. Some vehicles to implement this risk governance could be the PMO or the very same project manager or a risk governance body. And don't when we think about this governance body, probably we're thinking about something complex or very elaborated. But try to keep this committee small, punctual, strategic, a very punctual group. So probably a layout of this group might include risk SMEs, subject matter expert, uh, committed, management resources, and specific decision makers. Here's a flowchart that presents one flavor. This is not the flavor. This is just one flavor of a risk governance structure. In this case, this governance structure is not just for project work, but for the whole organization. So that means that you could implement this risk governance just for your project, or you can implement a risk governance for your entire organization, and all the project should follow this governance directions, policies, procedures. So the risk governance, it's this entity that help you to decide to perform this risk assessment, this appraisal, this evaluation, the management, an effective communication uh, to keep the risk management practices alive. And it definitely a big helper in this sustainability of this of the all these best practices. Well, that's it for today. I hope you enjoy this conference about risk management, and I'll expect to see you and discuss this or any further question later on. Thank you.